You're tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
Traditionally, it used to be that the West wanted a seat at the table. Now a lot of people, and more people, are saying we want independence. In October, there is a referendum on equalization. That is a stepping stone, a lot of people think, towards independence. The question comes down to whether an independence mindset can be pursued at the federal level, a la the Bloc Québécois. Jay Hill thinks it can. He is the interim leader of the Maverick Party. He's not actually seeking a seat, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But the Maverick Party, which originally was called the Wexit Party, but changed its name, is seeking a number of kind of conservative proposals, but at its core, they want a better deal for the West, and if they can't get that, they want out. And with that, I want to welcome into the program the interim leader of the Maverick Party, Jay Hill. Jay, good to talk to you again. Thanks for coming on today.
My pleasure, Andrew.
So let's first off talk about where the Maverick Party fits into this. I've spent a lot of time on the show talking about Western alienation, the growing Western independence movement. A lot of that has really been coming from people that want to make changes at the provincial level, whereas the Maverick Party is running candidates in a federal election. What's the goal here?
Well, as we explain on our website, Andrew, it's really a twin-track approach. We're trying to ensure that most Westerners would feel welcome in a federal home led by the Maverick Party as a partisan political movement. What we're suggesting is that either we need to have a renewed arrangement with the rest of Canada that treats the West fairly under Confederation, and that's why we've proposed 5 constitutional amendments to accomplish that, or alternatively, we need to work towards greater autonomy and independence for Western Canada, and we have a plan for that.
And just to make this clear for people, when you're talking about the West and Western Canada, you're not talking about Alberta specifically.
No, we're talking about all 4 Western provinces and indeed in the future, potentially the 3 Northern Territories. So basically everything west and north of the Hudson's Bay.
Explain why you think there can be a solution at a federal level here, because even if you were to have every seat west of Ontario, say, there still is going to be an Ontario and Quebec dominance in Parliament. So what could a slate of Western MPs, keeping in mind you're not running them in every Western riding, but what could even the full slate of Maverick candidates getting elected really do with those odds against you in the House of Commons?
Well, that's an excellent question, Andrew. And what we've suggested to Westerners is to look to Quebec and the example of the Bloc Québécois as an answer to that question. I would argue, having spent my entire 17 years in the House of Commons with Bloc members, that their strategy is very simple. They actually communicate it very forthrightly. They don't try to hide the fact that they are there strictly to represent Quebec and Quebec's best interests. So what I'm suggesting is that what we need in the House of Commons is a group of Western members of Parliament, very similar to the Bloc, that would be there only to represent Western interests. And that's what we're endeavoring to do with this first election. As you say, we're barely a year old. So we're only running in 29 ridings where the Westerners in those ridings will have that option of supporting a Maverick candidate on Monday. And we'll see whether they participate in that alternative.
I just spent a couple of days covering Maxime Bernier's campaign for the People's Party in Alberta, and a lot of voters there were asking him, listen, I want to vote Maverick or PPC, how do I decide? And the message that he was giving them is that the Bloc Québécois has never really done anything for Quebec, only the Parti Québécois has. So he's basically trying to say that a federal party cannot get results for a province. What's your response to that?
Well, I think that's absolute nonsense. I think where we've failed in Western Canada ever since Confederation, and certainly for the last 100 years or so, Andrew, is that we've never done what Quebec has done in the sense of playing the independence card, if you will. Even today, Jason Kenney and other provincial politicians are reticent to do that. They're very reluctant. In fact, they say they don't even want to talk about independence. My view, having spent, as I say, 17 years of my life in the House of Commons trying to make things work in Parliament for the West is that until we actually suggest that we're ready to leave, we're never going to get a fair deal. And that's the message we're carrying. And in the short term, Maverick members of Parliament operating similar to the Bloc would carry the message of true Western representation. I argue now that the Conservatives, the Liberals, the NDP, Greens, and even the PPC are not going to accurately represent the best interests of Westerners. So that's my argument to Max Bernier. I would suggest that Max should be refocusing these last few days on his own riding in Quebec if he's serious about re-entering Parliament and win that riding instead of being out here in Alberta telling Albertans how to vote.
As you mentioned, the Mavericks are only fielding 29 candidates here, so I don't think it's going to come as a shock to say that you aren't going to be forming a majority government come Monday or forming a government at all. But with that, it's also interesting to me that you as the interim leader are in an election campaign not seeking a seat yourself. You're not a permanent leader. You are an interim leader. What are voters to make of this, that you're a party that doesn't even really have a leader that's standing with their other candidates wanting to seek a seat?
Well, I would suggest they look at my personal history, Andrew. I've put in a big part of my adult lifetime in Parliament already. I guess if I was an ex-con, I'd say I've served my time. There's myself and three of my former Reform Party colleagues. Between us, we have over 60 years of parliamentary experience. The four of us are not seeking seats back in Parliament. As I say, we've served our time down in the House of Commons, and we're trying to mentor this new crop of candidates that have stepped forward to run for the Maverick Party. So it's a transition period. I would ask all voters looking at alternatives to look at our website at maverickparty.ca, look at our twin track mission statement, look at our 8 guiding principles and our policies and our platform, our constitution. Unlike the PPC, we actually have a party constitution. We have a governing council and their bios are all on there. This is not a one-man party like Maxime Bernier. And as you said, I quite proudly identify as the interim leader. It's my intention to try to help the party establish credibility. But from that point on, Andrew, we're looking to hand it over to the next generation of younger folks.
We know that during the Conservative Party of Canada leadership race, Aaron O'Toole was very much trying to align himself with the West, not pretend to be a Westerner, but he had Jason Kenney's endorsement. He did a lot of campaigning in Alberta. In the federal election campaign, and I've been following it fairly closely, I've not really heard Western interests brought up all that much at all. They didn't factor into the debates. There have been some Western adjacent topics in the context of pipelines, but there really hasn't been much oxygen given to Western interests, in my view. And I'm curious what your thoughts about that are.
Well, I would completely agree, Andrew. It's not only during the campaign, but I would argue ever since Aaron O'Toole won the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada, he has singularly focused on central Canada, on the needs of Toronto and surrounding area, and even more so on Quebec. And, why is Aaron O'Toole and all of his Western Conservative members of Parliament silent on how they would advocate people respond to Jason Kenney's equalization referendum next month? We haven't heard in that regard. I certainly know how Maverick feels, that we'll be urging everyone associated with Maverick Party to support that referendum question. In other words, vote yes. That should be removed from our constitution in Canada. It's unfair to the West. It's always been unfair, and it's even more so today with the struggles of our primary industries and Albertans in particular, but indeed people across the Prairie West. So there's a multitude of issues from carbon tax, flip-flop, to his willingness to have a contract with Quebec to ensure that Quebecers get everything that they want, and yet no mention, as you say, Andrew, of what the West needs and indeed deserves. And that's where the Maverick Party comes in. and why we believe that only a Maverick member of Parliament will represent what is best for the West.
I know the Maverick Party does have a platform that deals in some specifics on things like the carbon tax and some of the pipeline bills and parliamentary ethics and all of these things. But generally speaking, I think you've summed up the party's overarching vision as being a voice for the West and advocating for Western interests. With that, I'm curious, is this a left-right issue, this idea of standing up for the West and having a Western focus in representation? Are you only getting votes from the political right, or is this something that cuts across traditional partisan lines?
Well, certainly the majority of our 29 ridings that we're contesting, Andrew, we're looking to draw the majority of our support from Conservatives. There's a reason, of course, why we chose to run in the strongest held Conservative ridings. It's because then it comes down to those Western Canadians having a choice between voting for the status quo, supporting in most cases their incumbent Conservative member of Parliament. They know exactly what they're going to get. They're going to get silence from them on a lot of issues because they run contrary to the best interests of Toronto or Montreal. Or they can vote for a Maverick candidate and get true Western representation, which is our core message, as you suggest. So that's the big difference between Maverick and the Conservatives. Having said that, we don't view ourselves as right, left, or center. We view ourselves very much as good old-fashioned Western common sense, which unfortunately is not all that common anymore.
So with that here, I mean, what's the dream scenario for you at the end of this? Is it that you want to just have a couple of Maverick MPs elected, or is there a particular outcome that you think is best for Western interests that Maverick MPs could then be advocates within?
Well, I think you've named it there, is that ideally we can elect some Maverick MPs. We recognize that is going to be very, very difficult. Party less than a year old, only running in 29 ridings, only recently getting organized, short on resources, both financial and human resources. We don't have the thousands of volunteers we'd love to have to carry the message, Andrew, across Western Canada. Having said that, we also recognize that this is a stepping stone. It is a building block for Maverick, very similar to what the Reform Party did in 1988 when myself and Bell Meredith first ran for the party. We stayed involved for the years in between. And then, of course, we wiped out the Progressive Conservatives in 93. Does history repeat itself? It could very clearly. To move to independence, we support the majority of the Fair Deal panel recommendations that panel made to the Alberta government. We believe that many of those recommendations could also work in Saskatchewan and the other two Western provinces. We recognize that's provincial purview, but we're very supportive of moving towards greater autonomy along the same lines that Quebec has achieved for itself.
Jay Hill, interim leader of the Maverick Party and former cabinet minister and longtime member of Parliament at the federal level. Jay, good to talk to you. Thanks very much for coming on today.
Thank you, Andrew, and I always appreciate being on your show.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.